Two young guards laughed as they scanned the faded ID card, ready to turn away another confused veteran with expired credentials. But when that ancient piece of plastic hit their scanner, every alarm in the facility screamed to life. A golden emblem blazed across their screen, something they'd never seen, something that made seasoned officers go pale. The woman standing before them hadn't moved an inch. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. You have no idea who you just disrespected. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The autumn morning came in cold and clean, the kind that makes you think about second chances and endings all at once. Avery Cross stood at the edge of the parking lot outside the VA medical facility in Fredericksburg, Virginia, watching the early sun burn through the mist that clung to the asphalt like a memory refusing to fade. She was 54 years old, but her posture belonged to someone who'd never forgotten what it meant to stand at attention. Silver hair pulled back in a tight braid, a civilian windbreaker that had seen better days, boots worn smooth but polished to a dull shine, the kind of shine that comes from muscle memory, not vanity. She carried two things: a leather wallet that had traveled with her through places she'd never name, and a canvas folder marked only with initials so faded they were barely visible. AEC, her maiden name. The name she'd carried into places that didn't exist on any map. Avery didn't walk fast. She didn't need to. Time had taught her that rushing only attracts attention, and attention was something she'd spent most of her life avoiding. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile territory in heels and fatigues alike, who understood that the most dangerous weapon in any room was often the person no one was watching. The facility's main entrance was a study in bureaucratic architecture. Glass doors, metal detectors, tired security guards rotating through shifts that all blurred together into one long exercise in checking IDs and waving people through. It was 8:30 in the morning. The early rush had already passed. Just a handful of veterans shuffling in for appointments, a couple of staffers carrying coffee cups like lifelines, and two guards at the security checkpoint who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Private First Class Kinley was 22, fresh-faced, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been tested. He leaned against the security desk phone, half hidden under his clipboard, scrolling through something that made him smirk. Beside him, Private Mendoza, older by 3 years, but not much wiser, was telling some story about his weekend hands gesturing wildly voice, just loud enough to carry across the lobby. Neither of them looked up when Avery approached. She stopped at the checkpoint patient and waited. Kinley finished whatever he was reading, glanced up, and his expression barely changed, just that quick assessment people make when they think they've already figured you out. An older woman, civilian clothes, probably here for a routine appointment, probably confused about which building she needed, probably going to take forever explaining what she wanted. "Morning," Kinley said, not quite meeting her eyes. "ID, please." Avery reached into her wallet and pulled out a card. It was laminated, but the lamination had started to peel at the corners. The photo was grainy shot in the harsh fluorescent light of some long-ago security office. The woman in the picture had darker hair, a sharper jaw, but the eyes were the same steady clear, giving nothing away. Kinley took the card between two fingers like it might contaminate him. He held it up to the light, squinting at the faded print, and then he did something that would change the trajectory of his entire morning. He laughed. "Dude," he said, turning to Mendoza. "Check this out." Mendoza leaned over, took one look, and snorted. "Holy crap. Is that from the Cold War?" "Might as well be." Kinley flipped it over, examining the back. "Look at this thing. The date's so faded I can't even read it." "Pretty sure this belongs in a museum," Mendoza added, grinning. "Like behind glass, with a little plaque that says, 'Identification circa 1985, artist unknown.'" They both laughed, the easy, careless laughter of young men who'd never been made to feel small, who'd never stood on the wrong side of disrespect, and felt it burn. Avery didn't react. She stood there, hands loose at her sides, expression unchanged. She'd been laughed at before. By better men than these in situations far more consequential. She knew how this worked. Let them have their moment. Let them think they'd won something. "Ma'am," Kinley said, still smiling, "I'm not sure this is going to work. This card looks pretty expired. You might need to get a new one issued before—" "Scan it," Avery said. Her voice was quiet, even, but it carried weight. Not a request. Not a plea. Just a statement of fact. Kinley blinked. "I mean, I can try, but I'm telling you right now the system's probably gonna reject." "Scan it," she repeated, and this time there was something in her tone that made Mendoza stop smiling. Kinley shrugged, exchanged a glance with his partner, a look that said, "She wants to waste our time, fine," and swiped the card under the scanner. He was already preparing his sympathetic face, the one he used when he had to tell people their paperwork wasn't in order, when the screen flickered. It wasn't a normal flicker. It was the kind of stutter that happens when a system encounters something it doesn't understand, when protocols buried deep in the code suddenly wake up and start screaming. The screen went black. Then slowly a symbol began to materialize, gold against darkness, rotating with the smooth precision of something engineered for gravitas. A black triangle, perfectly equilateral, suspended inside a glowing circle. It turned once, twice, and then locked into position at the center of the screen. Kinley leaned forward, frowning. "What the system made a sound, a low, warbling tone that neither guard had ever heard before. Red text appeared below the symbol, letter by letter, like something being typed by invisible hands. Flag, protocol, Alpha 5. Authorized identity detected, clearance level above. Standard verification, do not detain. Stand by for confirmation." Mendoza's smile died. Is that supposed to happen?" Before Kinley could answer, the terminal locked. Every field on the screen went gray. The cursor disappeared. And then, from somewhere deeper in the building, came a sound they'd definitely never heard, a soft, insistent alarm, not loud enough to cause panic, but distinct enough to make heads turn. Kinley grabbed the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Checkpoint 1. We've got some kind of system flag on a routine ID scan. Can you—" The radio crackled, and a voice cut him off, sharp female authority that doesn't ask twice. "Checkpoint 1. What kind of flag?" "It says Alpha 5. It says Flag Protocol Alpha 5. There was a pause. Long enough for Kinley and Mendoza to look at each other with the dawning realization that they'd just stepped into something way outside their pay grade. When the voice came back, it was tighter controlled. "Lock that station down immediately. Do not let anyone leave. Do not touch anything. Someone's coming to you right now." The radio went silent. Kinley stared at the screen. Mendoza stared at Avery. She hadn't moved, hadn't flinched when the alarm started, hadn't reacted when the radio went off. She just stood there, hands still loose, face still calm, like this was exactly what she'd expected. "Ma'am," Mendoza said, and his voice cracked just slightly. What is that?" Avery tilted her head, considering him. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost kind. "It means someone upstairs is about to have a very bad morning." "But what does Alpha 5 mean?" Kinley asked, and now he didn't sound smug anymore. He sounded young. "It means," Avery said quietly, "that I'm not here by accident." Down the hallway they heard its footsteps, rapid and purposeful. Multiple sets. Then the sound of doors locking, the magnetic hum of security protocols engaging. Through the glass walls of the lobby, staffers stopped mid-conversation, looking around in confusion. Someone at the reception desk picked up a phone, listened, then stood abruptly and walked away with urgent strides. Kinley reached for the ID card, still sitting on the scanner bed. "I should probably—" "Don't touch it," Mendoza hissed. "Didn't you hear lock it down? Don't touch anything." They both stepped back from the terminal like it had become radioactive. Avery waited. She'd spent a lifetime waiting in safe houses, in extraction zones, in briefing rooms, where she wasn't allowed to speak, but had to absorb every word. Waiting was easy. Patience was one of the first things they'd taught her back when she was 23, and thought she understood what sacrifice meant. The footsteps got louder. Closer. Sergeant First Class Delaney rounded the corner like a small, angry storm system. She was 48, built like someone who'd done too many ruck marches to ever stand completely straight again, and her face carried the particular exhaustion of a senior NCO who'd been woken up on her day off and told to fix a problem she didn't create. She took one look at the two guards, pale, wide-eyed, standing well back from the security desk, and then at Avery, and her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally something that might have been respect. "Checkpoint secure," she barked at Mendoza. "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Both of you step outside this area. Wait by the front desk. Do not talk to anyone. Do not explain anything. Clear?" "Sergeant, we just—" Kinley started. "I said clear private." "Yes, Sergeant." They moved fast, and suddenly the checkpoint area felt very quiet. Just Avery and Delaney with the golden emblem still rotating slowly on the screen between them. Delaney approached the terminal, studied it for a long moment, then looked at Avery. Really looked at her the way someone does when they're trying to reconcile what they see with what they've been told. "Ma'am," she said finally, carefully, "I'm going to need to verify this through proper channels. This kind of flag, it's not something we see, ever." "I know," Avery said. "Can you tell me what this is about? No? Can you tell me why you're here? Medical appointment, just like everyone else." Delaney's jaw tightened. "With respect, ma'am, people just like everyone else don't trigger Alpha protocols. We have procedures for—" The intercom crackled to life, interrupting her. The voice that came through was different from the dispatcher, older male, carrying the kind of weight that comes with rank. "All stations Alpha 5 clearance has been confirmed through PERSCOM. Identity authenticated. Do not, I repeat, do not detain the individual. Apply full courtesy protocols. Military police escort en route." Delaney closed her eyes briefly, like she was praying for patience or forgiveness, maybe both. When she opened them, she looked at Avery with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I apologize for any—" "You were doing your job," Avery said. "No apology necessary. Still, if those two—" She gestured toward where Kinley and Mendoza were standing, looking like they wanted to melt into the floor if they said or did anything inappropriate. "They laughed at an old woman with a bad ID photo," Avery said evenly. "I've survived worse." The doors at the far end of the lobby opened, and two military police officers entered, Sergeant Collins and Corporal Reyes, both in full uniform, moving with the precise coordination of soldiers who'd done this before. They weren't rushing. They weren't drawing weapons. But there was something in their bearing that made every civilian in the lobby step aside without being asked. They reached the checkpoint, and Collins, a tall black woman with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing, rendered a crisp salute to Avery. Avery returned it automatic muscle memory from decades ago. "Ma'am," Collins said, "we're here to escort you. If you'll come with us, please." Delaney watched this exchange. Watched the two MPs flanking Avery, not like guards, but like honor guard, and something in her expression cracked. She turned to Kinley and Mendoza, still hovering by the reception desk, and her voice dropped to a register that promised consequences. "You two, my office, 30 minutes. Bring your duty logs." Kinley opened his mouth closed. It nodded mutely. Avery walked through the lobby, flanked by the MPs, and the atmosphere changed as she passed. Conversations stopped. People turned. The woman at the information desk stood up confused, watching this older lady in civilian clothes being escorted like visiting royalty. A veteran in a wheelchair waiting for his ride stared openly. Someone whispered, "What the hell was that about?" Kinley and Mendoza watched her go. Watched the way she moved, steady, unhurried, unbothered. Watched the way seasoned MPs deferred to her without question. And slowly the full weight of what they'd done settled over them like a suffocating blanket. "We tried to turn away someone who—" Mendoza started, then couldn't finish. Kinley just shook his head, face gone pale. "We laughed at her card." At the security desk, the terminal still displayed that golden emblem rotating in endless silence. Below it, the red text glowed like an accusation Alpha 5 authorized. And in that moment, in that quiet lobby with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows, two young men learned a lesson that no training manual could have taught them. That respect isn't something you give because someone looks important. It's something you give because you never know who's standing in front of you, or what they've carried or what they've sacrificed, in places you'll never hear about. Avery Cross disappeared through the secure doors at the end of the hallway, flanked by her escorts, leaving behind nothing but questions and the fading echo of alarms. And upstairs in offices, most of the staff didn't even know existed phones were ringing, and a woman named Colonel Tessa McBride was opening a file marked with red diagonal stripes and the words "classified, executive authorization required." The storm had just begun. The elevator climbed in silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes every breath audible. Avery stood between the two MPs, her eyes fixed on the ascending floor numbers, watching them tick upward with the steady patience of someone who'd learned long ago that rushing only makes time move slower. Sergeant Collins stood at her right posture, perfect hands clasped behind her back. Corporal Reyes was at her left, younger, fidgeting slightly with the radio on his belt, until Collins shot him a look that could have frozen water. They passed the third floor. The fourth. The elevator didn't stop. Most people who visited this facility never went higher than 3. That's where the public-facing offices were, the appointment desks, the pharmacy, the places designed for regular interaction. But the elevator kept climbing past floors that required key cards, past sections where the directory boards in the lobby pretended didn't exist. When the doors finally opened on the 7th floor, the atmosphere changed immediately. The fluorescent lighting was sharper, colder. The hallway was narrower, lined with unmarked doors and security cameras that tracked their movement with mechanical precision. No artwork on the walls here. No inspirational posters about service and sacrifice. Just cream-colored paint and the faint hum of electronics behind locked panels. Collins gestured forward. "This way, ma'am." They walked past doors labeled only with numbers and letters that meant nothing to anyone without clearance. A7, B12, C3. Halfway down the corridor, a woman emerged from one of the offices, mid-30s, wearing business casual and an expression of barely controlled panic. She was clutching a tablet and walking so fast she nearly collided with their group. "Excuse me, sorry, She stopped, stared at Avery, then at the MPs, then back at Avery. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God, you're the Alpha 5. "Captain Morris," Collins said sharply. "Secure your station." "But I need to know if we should—" "Now, Captain." Morris backed away, still staring, and disappeared into a side office. Through the briefly opened door, Avery caught a glimpse of multiple monitors, 3 people huddled around a desk. Voices urgent and overlapping. The door closed, cutting off the sound. "Lot of confusion this morning," Avery observed quietly. Collins's expression didn't change. "Yes, ma'am. Your clearance flag cascaded through multiple systems. We haven't seen that particular protocol activate in, well, I don't know if we've ever seen it. First time for everything." "May I ask, ma'am?" Reyes started, then caught himself. "Sorry, never mind." "You can ask," Avery said. Alpha 5. That's above Alpha 1 through 4, right? That's how it works." Avery smiled faintly. "No, Corporal. Alpha 5 doesn't mean 5th level. It means 5th person. There were 6 of us. Now there are 2. Reyes absorbed this, tried to process it. Failed. 2 people have that clearance in the whole military. In the whole country, Avery corrected. And one of them has been off the grid for 16 years. They reached the end of the hallway, where a set of double doors stood flanked by a security panel that looked significantly more sophisticated than anything downstairs. Collins swiped her card, placed her hand on a biometric reader, and waited. The panel blinked green. The doors unlocked with a heavy metallic thunk. Beyond them was a conference room that looked like it had been designed for entirely different purposes than conferences. The table was solid mahogany, old enough to have witnessed decades of conversations that would never appear in any official record. The chairs were leather-worn at the arms where nervous hands had gripped them. One wall was dominated by a screen currently displaying that same golden emblem that had appeared on the security terminal downstairs. On the opposite wall hung a single-framed photograph, black and white, showing a group of soldiers standing in front of a helicopter with no identifying markings. The photo was positioned in such a way that you had to be sitting at the head of the table to see it clearly. 4 people were already in the room, and all of them turned when Avery entered. Major Warren, the facility's operations officer, stood near the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was 52, career military, and he looked like someone who'd just discovered his entire understanding of how things worked was incomplete. Beside him, Lieutenant Foster, early 30s intelligence officer, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, was scrolling through something on a tablet with the manic energy of someone trying to find answers that didn't exist. At the table sat 2 civilians. Or at least they wore civilian clothes. The woman was in her 40s, blonde hair pulled back, wearing a gray suit that was professional without being memorable. Her name tag said J. Carver, and nothing else. The man beside her was older, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that comes from spending decades in places where comfort isn't a consideration. His name tag was turned around blank, side facing out. Everyone stopped talking when Avery walked in. Major Warren recovered first. "Ma'am, thank you for, we appreciate your patience while we sort through—" "Where's McBride?" Avery asked. The room went quiet. Foster looked up from her tablet. Warren's expression shifted. "Colonel McBride is en route. She was off-site when the flag triggered. She should be here in approximately 15 minutes, a voice called from the doorway. They all turned. Colonel Tessa McBride strode in like a force of nature, bottled into a 5'6" frame, still buckling her service belt, hair pulled back in a hasty bun, and eyes that could cut through excuses like a laser through paper. She was 57, had commanded 3 different installations, survived 2 combat deployments, and possessed the particular kind of authority that doesn't require volume. She took one look at Avery and stopped. For just a moment, the hard edges softened. Jesus Christ, Avery. Tessa. They stared at each other across the conference room, and something passed between them. Recognition memory, the weight of shared history that no one else in the room could access. Then McBride turned to the others, and the softness vanished. "Everyone out except Carver," she said. "Colonel, with respect, I'm the operations officer." "I should be," Warren started. "Major, you're about to be briefed on something that you currently don't have clearance for. Would you like me to change that, or would you prefer to maintain your current career trajectory without a TSSCI addendum that will complicate every background check for the rest of your life?" Warren's mouth opened, closed. "I'll wait outside." "Good choice. Foster, you too. Collins Reyes, thank you for the escort. Dismissed." They filed out, Warren casting one last confused look at Avery before the doors closed behind him. The man with the backward name tag stood nodded once to Avery, a gesture that carried recognition and respect, and followed the others out without a word. That left 3 people in the room, Avery McBride and Jay Carver, who hadn't moved from her seat and was watching the interaction with the detached interest of someone accustomed to classified chaos. McBride moved to the head of the table, pulled out the chair, and sat with the careful deliberation of someone buying time to organize thoughts. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit, please." Avery sat. Carver remained where she was, tablet now face down on the table, hands folded. "Before we start," McBride said, "I need to ask the obvious question. Why now you've had that ID card for 31 years? You've visited VA facilities before. Hell, you were at Walter Reed 6 months ago for your shoulder. Why activate the flag today?" "I didn't activate anything," Avery said calmly. "Your system did. I just asked them to scan my card. They don't usually scan cards for routine appointments. They don't usually laugh at someone's ID and call it a museum piece either." McBride's eyebrows rose. "The guards downstairs. 2 kids who thought expired meant irrelevant." "Jesus." McBride rubbed her temples. "Okay, walk me through what happened." Avery told her. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. The mocking, the laughter, the scan, the alarm. She recounted it without emotion, just facts, but Carver's expression grew progressively darker with each sentence. When Avery finished, McBride turned to Carver. "How bad is this?" "Depends on your definition of bad," Carver said. Her voice was measured accent, vaguely mid-Atlantic, the kind of neutral that came from years of speaking carefully. "From a security standpoint, not terrible. The system worked exactly as designed. From a personnel standpoint, we have 2 junior enlisted who just learned they're not as clever as they thought. From a political standpoint," she paused. "How many people saw the escort? Full lobby," Avery said. "Maybe 20 people. And they saw 2 MPs walk you out with honors." "They saw 2 MPs walk me out, period. I don't know about honors." "If Collins saluted you, it was honors," McBride said. "She doesn't salute civilians unless specifically instructed or protocol demands it." "Then yes, honors." Carver made a note on her tablet. "We'll need to manage the narrative. Can't have people asking questions we can't answer." "What people?" Avery asked. "Veterans wondering why an old woman got VIP treatment they'll forget by lunch. You'd be surprised what people remember," Carver said, "and what they post online when they're confused." McBride leaned forward. "Avery, do you understand why your clearance triggered a facility-wide alert? Because someone probably in your position decided 30 years ago that Alpha 5 credentials should never be scanned without notification up the chain. That's part of it. The other part is that your clearance level is architecturally baked into systems that were designed when we still thought the Soviet Union was the primary threat. Those systems were built with protocols that assume anyone with Alpha 5 access is either in crisis or bringing crisis with them. When you scanned your card, the system interpreted it as a potential emergency, requiring immediate containment and executive notification. So the system panicked. The system did exactly what it was supposed to do. We panicked. Carver cleared her throat. Colonel, if I may. Miss Cross, how much do you remember about the conditions of your clearance? All of it, Avery said. I signed documents saying I understood that my involvement in Operation Echo Zero and related activities was classified at a level that superseded normal TS-SCI protocols. I was told that my clearance would remain active in perpetuity unless formally revoked by executive order or in the event of my death. I was also told that the operation itself would be scrubbed from accessible records, and that any reference to it would be routed through specific channels. Do you know how many people are aware that Echo Zero existed? I know how many people are supposed to be aware. 17 as of my last briefing in 1994-4. But I also know how governments work. Someone always knows more than they're supposed to. Carver smiled thinly. You're not wrong. Current count is 23. That includes everyone in this room. And the 2 guards downstairs? Avery asked. No, absolutely nothing, and it'll stay that way, McBride said. They saw a flag they didn't understand, followed orders, and will be strongly encouraged to forget the entire incident. They won't forget? No. But they'll stop asking questions once they realize asking questions about Alpha protocols is a career-limiting move. There was a knock at the door. McBride called out, Enter. Lieutenant Foster stepped in, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Colonel, sorry to interrupt, but PERSCOM is asking for confirmation that the situation is resolved. They want to know if they should expect further flag activity. Tell them situation contained no further activity anticipated, and that I'll file a formal after-action report by end of business. They're also asking for identity confirmation on the Alpha 5. They said protocol requires Foster. McBride's voice dropped to a register that made the lieutenant freeze mid-sentence. Tell them the identity has been confirmed through appropriate channels, and that further inquiries should be directed to my office. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Foster retreated, closing the door carefully. Carver waited until the footsteps faded. You know that's not going to satisfy them. I don't care. PERSCOM has no need to know beyond the flag was legitimate and resolved. If they want details, they can file a request through proper channels, which will get bounced around for 6 months before someone tells them to drop it. Someone at PERSCOM will eventually figure out who she is, Carver said, gesturing toward Avery. Cross isn't exactly a common name in the right databases. Let them figure it out. By the time they do, it'll be old news. Avery had been listening to this exchange with the detached interest of someone watching a play they'd seen before. Now she spoke up, voice cutting through the bureaucratic tension. You're both acting like this is some kind of catastrophe. It's not. It's 2 kids making fun of an old lady and a system that's too sensitive for its own good. Nobody died. Nobody's cover got blown. The only thing that happened is you all got reminded that some of us are still around. McBride looked at her, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. We thought you'd retired that card, that you'd let it expire naturally. It doesn't expire, Tessa. You just said so yourself. Perpetual clearance. That was the deal. The deal was also that you'd stay off the radar, that you'd let the past be the past. I am off the radar. I live in rural Pennsylvania. I drive a pickup truck that's older than most lieutenants. I buy groceries and pay taxes and go to the VA for appointments like every other veteran. I didn't ask for this. I asked them to scan my damn ID so I could get my shoulder looked at. The silence that followed was heavy-weighted with 30 years of history that Carver clearly didn't fully understand, and McBride wished she could forget. Finally, Carver spoke. For what it's worth, Ms. Cross, the system flagging your credentials wasn't a judgment on you. It was a judgment on how seriously we take the work you did. There are exactly 6 people who were ever given Alpha 5 designation. 4 are dead. 1 hasn't been seen since 2009. That makes you incredibly valuable, even if you're just here for a medical appointment. I'm not valuable, Avery said quietly. I'm a reminder. There's a difference. A reminder of what? That some things cost more than anyone wants to admit. McBride stood, abruptly walked to the window, stared out at the parking lot, 7 floors below, where regular people were coming and going, oblivious to the conversation happening above them. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, almost gentle. Do you want me to deactivate the flag? I can make it so your card scans normally. No alarms, no protocols, just regular clearance. Avery considered this. Can you do that without deactivating the clearance itself? Technically, yes. We'd be keeping the clearance active in the system, but suppressing the automatic notification. You'd still have the access level, but scanning your card wouldn't trigger the alert cascade. And if I needed to actually use the clearance if something happened, and I needed to prove who I am and what I have access to, McBride turned to face her. Then you'd call me directly and I'd verify it manually. But Avery, when would you ever need to use it? Avery smiled, small and sad. Hopefully never. But 31 years ago, someone decided people like me needed permanent clearance because they understood that wars don't end when the shooting stops, that some battles keep going in different forms. I'd like to think they had a reason. They did, Carver said quietly. We still do. There are situations where someone with your operational history and clearance level could be critical. Unlikely situations, but possible. So keep it active, Avery said. All of it. The clearance, the flag, the protocols. If that means I occasionally cause a stir when some kid doesn't recognize what they're looking at, so be it. Maybe it's good for people to remember that the person standing in front of them might have a story they can't imagine. McBride returned to the table, sat down, and looked at Avery with an expression that mixed exasperation and respect. You're going to make my life complicated. Your life was already complicated. I'm just adding texture. What am I supposed to tell Warren Foster, the dozen other people who saw the flag and are going to have questions? Tell them what you always tell them when something's above their clearance. It's handled, move on. And the 2 guards, Avery's expression hardened slightly. That's your call. But if you're asking my opinion, they need more than a talking to. They need to understand that disrespect has consequences. Not punishment necessarily. Education. McBride nodded slowly. I'm reassigning them to maintenance duty for 2 weeks. They'll spend their days scrubbing floors and emptying trash while they think about what it means to judge someone by their appearance. It's not a formal reprimand, so it won't affect their records, but it'll be memorable. Good. Carver stood gathering her tablet. I'll file a report with my office indicating the situation was a routine verification of legacy credentials resolved without incident. No operational impact, no security breach. That should satisfy the people who need to be satisfied. Who do you work for exactly? Avery asked. Carver smiled. People who prefer not to be named, but people who remember Echo Zero and want to make sure we don't repeat certain mistakes. We're still making those mistakes, Avery said. Different faces, same patterns? I know. We're trying. Carver left, and then it was just Avery and McBride in the conference room with the golden emblem still rotating on the screen and decades of unspoken history between them. You could have called ahead, McBride said finally. Given me warning. And missed the look on those kids' faces when the alarm went off, not a chance. You're enjoying this. A little, Avery admitted. Is that terrible? Probably. But I get it. McBride leaned back in her chair. You know what the worst part is? Those two guards will tell this story for the rest of their lives. They'll tell it at reunions, at bars, to their kids. And every time they tell it, they'll remember the day they laughed at someone they shouldn't have. That's going to follow them. Good, Avery said. Memory's a powerful teacher. McBride stood, offered her hand. Your appointment's in 30 minutes. Building C, 3rd floor, Dr. Martinez. He's expecting you. I'll have Collins drive you over so you don't have to go back through the main lobby. I can walk? I know you can, but you won't. Consider it a courtesy, not an insult. Avery took her hand, shook it. Thanks, Tessa. Don't thank me. Just try not to activate any more protocols, okay? My blood pressure can't take it. They walked to the elevator together, and as the doors closed behind them, the conference room returned to silence. The golden emblem continued to rotate on the screen, a symbol that meant everything and nothing depending on who was looking at it. And in offices throughout the building, people were filing reports and making calls and trying to explain something that couldn't be explained without revealing truths that were supposed to stay buried. Downstairs, in a supply closet that smelled of disinfectant and regret, Private Kinley and Private Mendoza sat on overturned buckets, still in their uniforms, but stripped of their duty belts and radios, waiting for Sergeant Delaney to tell them what came next. Neither of them had spoken in 10 minutes. They didn't need to. They both understood that something fundamental had shifted, that they'd learned a lesson they'd never forget, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. And somewhere on the 7th floor, in a secure file room that required 3 separate authorizations to enter, a clerk pulled a folder marked with red diagonal stripes and added a single new entry to a log that hadn't been updated in 8 years. The entry was simple. Alpha 5 verification completed. Clearance confirmed active. No further action required. The file went back into the cabinet. The cabinet locked. The room went dark. And Avery Cross, 54 years old, with silver hair and worn boots, and a past that officially didn't exist, stepped out into the autumn morning to see a doctor about her shoulder, just like she'd planned. The drive to Building C took less than 5 minutes, but Sergeant Collins drove like she was transporting something fragile and irreplaceable, taking corners with careful precision and checking the mirrors more often than necessary. Avery sat in the passenger seat of the unmarked sedan, watching the facility grounds roll past manicured lawns that someone mowed with military precision, walkways lined with memorial plaques. Nobody stopped to read anymore, the flag snapping in the wind above the main building like it was trying to get someone's attention. Collins hadn't said much since they left the conference room. Just the basics. Building C is where they handle orthopedics and physical therapy. Dr. Martinez is good. Did 2 tours as a combat surgeon before he came stateside. She drove in silence for another minute, then added quietly, "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "You can ask," Avery said, echoing what she'd told Corporal Reyes earlier. "Doesn't mean I can answer." "That emblem that came up on the screen, the triangle in the circle, what does it mean?" Avery looked at her at this sergeant who'd served long enough to know that some questions don't have simple answers, but young enough to still think asking them might lead somewhere useful. It means someone decided a long time ago that certain people needed to be remembered in certain ways. That's all. But the Alpha 5 designation means I was 5th, that's all it means. 5th person in a program that needed 6, nothing more complicated than that. Collins, absorbed this, knew she wasn't getting the full story, accepted it. "The 2 guards who scanned your card, Kinley and Mendoza, they're good kids. Stupid this morning, but good." "I know. You're not mad at them." "I was never mad at them," Avery said. "Mad would require me to care what they thought. I don't. But they needed to learn something, and sometimes the universe provides teaching moments whether we ask for them or not. Sergeant Delaney's going to make their lives hell for the next 2 weeks. Good. Hell's a decent classroom if you survive it. They pulled up to Building C, a low-slung structure that looked more like a high school than a medical facility, all brick and glass and ramps installed as afterthoughts, when someone remembered that veterans often come with mobility issues. Collins put the car in park, but didn't kill the engine. "Ma'am, Colonel McBride asked me to wait and drive you home after your appointment, if that's acceptable." "It's not necessary." "I know, but I'd feel better." Avery studied her for a moment, saw something in the sergeant's face that went beyond following orders. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Or that particular kind of care that soldiers develop for people they recognize as having walked through fire and come out the other side. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll be about an hour. Take your time. I've got paperwork." Avery climbed out of the car, felt her shoulder protest immediately that deep ache that started as a dull throb and built into something sharper if she moved wrong and headed toward the entrance. The automatic doors opened with a mechanical sigh, and she stepped into a waiting room that looked like every other VA waiting room in America. Gray carpet, beige walls, chairs that were comfortable enough to sit in, but not comfortable enough to fall asleep in a television mounted in the corner playing morning news with the sound off. Half a dozen people were already waiting scattered across the seating area, with the strategic spacing of people who'd rather not make small talk. Avery checked in at the desk, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said, Maria, smiled professionally, and asked for her ID. Avery handed over the same card that had caused so much chaos an hour earlier. Maria scanned it, and this time the system simply beeped once and populated her information on the screen without any golden emblems or facility-wide alerts. Someone had clearly adjusted something in the system. Made it quieter. Avery wasn't sure if she was grateful or disappointed. "You're all set, Ms. Cross. Dr. Martinez is running about 10 minutes behind, but he'll call you back soon. You can have a seat." Avery found a chair near the window away from the television and settled in to wait. Waiting was easy. She was good at it. Had spent enough time in her life sitting in rooms like this, different countries, different circumstances, but always the same basic equation of time passing, while you tried not to think too hard about what came next. Across the room, an older man in a Vietnam veteran's cap was reading a paperback with yellowed pages. Beside him, a woman in her 40s scrolled through her phone with the mechanical repetition of someone not really looking at what was on the screen. Near the door, a young guy couldn't be older than 25, sat with his hands clasped between his knees, leg bouncing with nervous energy. Iraq or Afghanistan, Avery guessed. Maybe Syria. Somewhere sandy where the danger came from all directions and trust was a luxury nobody could afford. The television cycled through its programming weather traffic, a segment about a local charity drive, then a brief mention of some political thing happening in Washington that seemed very important to the people talking about it, and completely irrelevant to everyone actually living their lives. Avery watched the silent images flicker past, and thought about how strange it was that the world just kept spinning, regardless of what happened in rooms like the one she'd left upstairs. How people went about their business not knowing that sometimes in buildings exactly like this one, conversations happened that could change everything or nothing depending on which thread you pulled. Avery Cross. She looked up. A man stood in the doorway to the examination room's clipboard in hand, wearing scrubs and a white coat that had seen better days. Dr. Martinez, she assumed. Late 40s Latino, with the kind of calm competence that came from having seen too many injuries to get rattled by much anymore. He smiled when she stood. "Come on back." She followed him down a hallway lined with examination rooms, each one identical to the next. He led her to number 7, gestured to the exam table. "Have a seat. So you're here about shoulder pain?" "Right shoulder. Started about 6 months ago. Gets worse with overhead movement. Previous injury. Dislocated it in 1993. Had surgery. Physical therapy. Thought it was fine." "Surgery where?" "Walter Reed." He made a note. "Okay, let's take a look." He ran through the standard tests range of motion resistance pressure points, his hands gentle but thorough. Avery had been through this enough times to know the routine. She answered his questions with the practiced brevity of someone who understood that doctors needed facts, not stories. "Does this hurt?" He pressed on a specific point. "Yes." "And this, less." "What about when I do this?" He rotated her arm in a way that made her shoulder socket feel like someone was scraping bone against bone. "That hurts." "I bet." He stepped back, made more notes. "Looks like you've got some degenerative changes in the joint. Not unusual for someone with your history. The old injury probably accelerated the wear. We can do imaging to confirm, but I'm fairly confident we're looking at some arthritis and possibly a partial tear in the rotator cuff. Treatment options: physical therapy, anti-inflammatories, possibly a cortisone injection if the pain gets worse. Surgery's an option too, but I like to exhaust the conservative approaches first. You still active, exercise regularly." "I walk, some light weights, nothing extreme." "Okay, let's start with PT and see where we are in 6 weeks. If it's not improving, we'll talk about next steps." He pulled out a prescription pad, started writing. "I'm referring you to our physical therapy department. They'll call you to schedule. In the meantime, ice it when it's inflamed heat, when it's stiff, and try not to lift anything heavy over your head." That's it. He looked up from his writing. "Were you expecting something more dramatic?" "No. Just seems anticlimactic after the morning I've had." Something in his expression shifted just slightly, just enough to tell her that he'd heard something. Maybe not details, but whispers. The way information travels through a facility like this, carried on the informal network of people who know, people who heard things. "You're the Alpha 5, he said. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast." "Not that fast. I got a call from Colonel McBride about 40 minutes ago. She wanted to make sure you were seen promptly and with appropriate respect." He said the last word carefully, like he was testing how it fit. "She didn't tell me why. Just that I should treat you like visiting brass without actually treating you like visiting brass." Sounds like Tessa. "You know the Colonel. We've crossed paths." He studied her for a moment, this doctor who'd seen enough soldiers to recognize one even when they weren't in uniform anymore. "Whatever you did, whatever that clearance means, it must have been important." "It was necessary," Avery said. "Important and necessary aren't always the same thing." "No, I suppose they're not." He handed her the prescriptions, the referral paperwork. "Take care of that shoulder. And Ms. Cross, thank you. For whatever it was." "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know. That's why I'm giving them anyway." She left the exam room and made her way back through the building past the waiting room where new patients had replaced the old ones in the eternal cycle of people needing help and people trying to provide it. Outside, Sergeant Collins was leaning against the sedan, scrolling through her phone with the bored patience of someone accustomed to waiting. She looked up when Avery emerged. "All good. All good. Just getting old. Aren't we all?" Collins opened the passenger door. "Where to home?" "You don't have to drive me home. I can call a cab." Ma'am, with respect, Colonel McBride would have my ass if I let you call a cab. And frankly, I'm curious. You live far? About 40 minutes. Rural route outside Mercersburg. I've never been out that way. It's quiet. That's the point. They drove out of the facility grounds past the security checkpoint where Kinley and Mendoza were conspicuously absent, replaced by two different guards who waved them through without question. The road opened up beyond the gates, transitioning from the manicured institutional landscape to regular Pennsylvania countryside, rolling hills farms, separated by stone walls that had been standing since before anyone currently alive was born. Houses set back from the road like they were trying to maintain a respectful distance from modernity. Collins drove in silence for a while, then said, "Can I ask what you did before? You can ask. But you won't tell me." "I can't tell you. There's a difference." "Right. Clearance." Collins drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. "I've been in for 14 years. I've seen a lot of weird stuff, but I've never seen anything like what happened this morning. That emblem on the screen, the way everyone just froze. It was like someone had invoked a ghost." "Maybe they did. Are you a ghost, Ms. Cross?" Avery smiled faintly. "Some days it feels like it. Most of the people who knew what I did are dead or retired or have convinced themselves they never knew in the first place. The work I did doesn't exist in any official record. The places I went aren't on maps. The things I saw aren't in history books. So yeah, I guess I'm a kind of ghost. The living kind." "That sounds lonely." "It is what it is." They drove past a farmhouse with a hand-painted sign advertising fresh eggs and honey, past a church with a cemetery that sprawled up a hillside, like generations climbing toward something they'd been promised. The landscape grew more rural, the houses farther apart, the trees thicker. This was the kind of country where people minded their own business and expected you to do the same, where privacy wasn't a luxury, but a requirement. "Take the next left," Avery said. "Then about 3 miles up." Collins turned onto a narrower road, paved but barely with gravel shoulders and no center line. The trees closed in overhead, creating a tunnel of autumn-color reds and golds, and that particular shade of orange that only happens in October. They passed a mailbox with no name on it, just a number. Then another. Then a dirt driveway that curved away into the woods. "Here," Avery said. Collins turned in. The driveway was longer than expected, winding through trees and over a small wooden bridge that spanned a creek barely wider than the car. Eventually, the trees opened up into a clearing, and there sat a small house, single-story, white, clapboard siding, green metal roof, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It looked like something from a different era. Well-maintained, but deliberately simple. The kind of place that suggested whoever lived there preferred function over fashion. An old pickup truck sat in the driveway, forest green, probably from the late 90s, based on the body style. A woodpile stood stacked against the side of the house, neatly arranged under a tarp. A bird feeder hung from a tree branch, empty at the moment, but clearly used regularly based on the scatter of seed hulls below it. Collins put the car in park, killed the engine, and looked around. "This is nice. Peaceful." "That's the idea." Avery reached for the door handle, then paused. "Thank you for the ride, and for this morning. You handled it well." "I just followed orders." "No. You showed respect without being told to. That's different." Collins seemed uncertain how to respond to this, so she just nodded. Avery climbed out, closed the door, and was halfway to the porch when Collins called out, "Ms. Cross." She turned back. "Whatever you did, whatever that clearance means, I hope it was worth it." Avery thought about this. Thought about all the missions that didn't have names, all the decisions made in rooms where the wrong choice meant people died, and the right choice meant people died differently. Thought about the years spent being someone else in places where being yourself would get you killed. Thought about coming home to silence and living with ghosts, and trying to figure out what normal looked like when you'd spent so long pretending normal was something it wasn't. "Ask me again in another 30 years, she said finally. "Maybe I'll have an answer by then." She went inside, and Colin sat in the driveway for another minute, staring at the house, at this woman's carefully constructed sanctuary of quiet, before starting the engine and heading back down the long driveway toward whatever came next. Inside the house, Avery set her paperwork on the kitchen table, filled a glass with water from the tap, and stood at the window looking out at the woods behind her property. The trees were thick here, old growth mixed with newer stands, and beyond them was nothing but more woods for miles. She'd chosen this place specifically for its isolation, for the way it let her breathe without feeling like someone was watching, analyzing, evaluating whether she was maintaining her cover or slipping. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't have saved, but recognized anyway. Tessa McBride. "All quiet on the Western Front. Guards reassigned. Paperwork filed. You're officially just another veteran with a shoulder problem. Sleep well knowing you terrorized half my staff." Avery typed back. "They'll recover. Character building." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "You're not wrong. Lunch sometime would be good to catch up properly, without protocols and panic," when Avery hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Lunch meant talking. Talking meant remembering. Remembering meant opening doors she'd worked hard to keep closed. But it also meant connection, and she'd been alone long enough to know that isolation was its own kind of danger. "Sure," she typed. "Call me when you know your schedule." "Will do. And Avery, it was good to see you, even under weird circumstances." "You too." She set the phone down, finished her water, and walked through the house she'd made into a home past the bookshelf full of novels she'd read multiple times, past the photographs carefully curated to show a life that was real but incomplete, past the locked door of the room she used for things she couldn't quite let go of yet. In the bedroom, she changed out of her civilian clothes into sweatpants and an old t-shirt from a 10K race she'd run 5 years ago. Normal things. Regular things. The kind of things regular people did on regular days. She made lunch a sandwich, some fruit chips from a bag that crinkled too loud in the quiet kitchen, and ate it at the table while reading a book about the history of the Appalachian Trail. When she finished, she washed the dishes by hand, even though she had a dishwasher, because the routine was soothing, and she needed soothing after a morning that had been anything but routine. Around 2 in the afternoon, her shoulder started aching again, that deep, persistent throb that Dr. Martinez had promised would get worse before the physical therapy made it better. She took 2 ibuprofen, filled an ice pack, and settled on the couch with it pressed against the joint, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of her shirt and into the inflammation beneath. The book lay open on her lap, but she wasn't reading anymore. She was thinking about 2 young guards who'd laughed at something they didn't understand and learned a lesson they'd carry forever, about a colonel who remembered when things were different and carried the weight of those memories in every decision, about a system that had been designed to protect something important and still worked even decades later, even when the people who built it were long gone. She was thinking about being 5th in a line of 6, and about the one who'd gone missing 16 years ago, and about whether that person was still alive somewhere living under a different name, in a different kind of quiet, or whether they'd finally found a way to escape that didn't involve breathing. She was thinking about legacy and sacrifice, and the way some prices keep getting paid long after the transaction is supposed to be complete, and she was thinking that maybe, just maybe, it had been good to remind everyone that she was still here, still standing, still carrying what needed to be carried, even if nobody knew exactly what that meant. Outside, the afternoon light shifted through the trees, painting patterns on the porch that would change and fade and disappear by evening. A crow called from somewhere in the woods, harsh and insistent. The creek behind the house murmured over stones worn smooth by time and water. And Avery Cross Alpha 5, the ghost, who wasn't quite a ghost, sat in her quiet house and let the ice do its work, while the world spun on, mostly unaware and entirely unchanged by what had happened that morning in a VA facility 40 minutes away. Mostly, but not completely, because somewhere in offices and break rooms and parking lots, people were talking, asking questions, sharing stories about the woman with the ancient ID card who'd triggered alarms nobody knew existed. And those stories would spread the way. Stories do, mutating slightly with each telling, but maintaining their essential truth that respect matters, that assumptions are dangerous, and that sometimes the people you dismiss are the ones who earned the right to be taken seriously a long time ago. The ice pack grew warm against her shoulder. Avery shifted it, resettled, and finally started reading again, letting someone else's words carry her away from her own thoughts for a while. It had been a strange morning, but it was shaping up to be a perfectly ordinary afternoon, which was exactly what she'd been hoping for when she'd decided weeks ago to make that appointment. Sometimes ordinary was the greatest luxury of all. The ordinary afternoon didn't last as long as Avery had hoped. Around 4 o'clock, just as the shadows were starting to stretch long across her property, and she was considering what to make for dinner, her phone rang. Not a text this time. An actual call. The screen showed a number with a Washington, D.C. area code that she didn't recognize, which immediately made her wary. She let it ring twice more while she decided whether answering was worth the potential complication, then picked up. Hello. Ms. Cross, this is Deputy Director Holland from the Office of Personnel Management Security Service. The voice was male 50s maybe, with the clipped precision of someone who spent their days navigating bureaucratic minefields. I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to discuss this morning's incident at the Fredericksburg VA facility. Avery closed her book, set it aside, and stood up, ice pack sliding off her shoulder onto the couch. What about it? The system flag that was triggered when you presented your credentials. We've received multiple inquiries from various offices trying to understand the nature of the clearance level involved. I'm calling to verify some information and to determine whether we need to conduct a formal review of your active status. My active status was confirmed this morning by Colonel McBride and authenticated through PersCom. That should be sufficient. Under normal circumstances, yes, but Alpha 5 isn't a normal clearance level, Ms. Cross. In fact, according to our current database, it shouldn't exist at all. The program it was associated with was decommissioned in 1996. Then your database is incomplete. There was a pause, the kind that suggested Holland was recalibrating his approach. I understand you may not be at liberty to discuss the specifics of your previous assignment, but I need to establish some basic facts. Can you confirm that you were part of Operation Echo Zero? I can't confirm or deny anything about operations that may or may not be classified. Ms. Cross, I have appropriate clearance for this conversation. Do you? What's your clearance level? Another pause. TSSCI, with special access to legacy programs. Then you should know that Echo Zero required clearance above TSSCI, which means even if I wanted to discuss it, I couldn't. Not with you. Not on an unsecured phone line. Not without written authorization from someone significantly higher up the chain than a deputy director. She could hear him breathing, could picture him sitting in some office surrounded by file folders and computer monitors trying to figure out how to handle someone who knew the rules better than he did. "I'm not trying to compromise operational security," he said finally. "I'm trying to understand why a civilian is carrying active credentials that trigger facility-wide alerts." "I'm not a civilian. I'm a veteran with specialized clearance that was granted under specific conditions that apparently nobody bothered to properly document when they updated their systems. That's not my problem. That's yours. With respect, it becomes your problem if we determine that your clearance needs to be reviewed or revoked." Avery walked to the window, looked out at the woods, and felt that old familiar tension settling into her spine, the awareness that she was being threatened, however politely, and that she needed to decide how to respond. She could cooperate, be diplomatic, make this easier for everyone. Or she could remind this deputy director that some doors once opened revealed things people weren't prepared to see. "Deputy Director Holland," she said, her voice dropping into a register she hadn't used in years, the one that came from a different version of herself. "If you attempt to review or revoke my clearance without proper authorization, you will trigger protocols that involve people you don't want to talk to. People who will ask why you're digging into programs that were classified at executive level. People who will wonder if you're curious or compromised. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted longer this time. When Holland spoke again, his voice had lost some of its bureaucratic confidence. "Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. There's a reason my clearance has remained active for 31 years. There's a reason it triggers alerts. There's a reason people like Colonel McBride know better than to ask questions they don't need answers to. You should take their example." "I have superiors who expect answers, Ms. Cross." "Then tell them the truth. Tell them you called someone with Alpha 5 clearance, and that person reminded you that Alpha 5 exists outside normal channels for reasons that remain classified. Tell them that attempting to dig deeper will require authorization from someone at the executive level, and that by the time they get that authorization, they'll have attracted attention from agencies that prefer not to be noticed. Tell them it's better to mark this as resolved and move on. And if they don't accept that, then they'll learn the same lesson those two guards learned this morning. Some things aren't worth the trouble of investigating." Holland was quiet for a moment, and she could hear papers rustling, a keyboard clicking. "You're very confident for someone who's been out of the game for decades." "I'm confident because I know what I signed, and I know what I'm still bound to, and I know that the people who set this system up weren't idiots. They understood that some operations have long tail implications. They built protection into the structure. You're running into that protection right now." "Who do you report to, Ms. Cross?" "Nobody unless activated, which I haven't been. Which means I'm just a veteran with a shoulder problem who happened to scan an old ID card and reminded everyone that paperwork matters." More rustling, more keyboard sounds, then a long exhale. "Fine. I'll file a report indicating that your clearance was verified through appropriate channels and that no further action is warranted at this time. But Ms. Cross, if you trigger this kind of alert again, I can't promise the response will be this measured." "Then it's a good thing I don't plan on triggering it again. I just want to see my doctor and live my life. That's all." "I hope that's true, for both our sakes." He hung up. Avery stood there with the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the silence, feeling the adrenaline that had spiked during the conversation starting to fade. She'd handled it. Pushed back just hard enough to make him reconsider without pushing so hard that he felt obligated to escalate. It was a delicate balance, one she'd learned in rooms where the wrong word could end careers or lives, and she was relieved to discover she still knew how to walk that line. She called Tessa McBride. The colonel answered on the second ring. "Let me guess. You got a call from OPM." "Deputy Director Holland. Wanted to discuss my clearance status. Son of a bitch. I specifically told them this was handled. What did he say? That he had superiors who wanted answers. I told him the answers would cause more problems than they'd solve. And he backed down, said he'd file a report marking it as resolved. But Tessa, this isn't going to stop. Someone's going to keep digging. Someone always does. McBride swore quietly. I know. The problem is that your clearance exists in a database maintained by 3 different agencies, and they don't always talk to each other efficiently. OPM sees a flag they don't recognize and starts asking questions. Defense Intelligence sees the same flag and knows better than to ask. CIA sees it and pretends they never saw anything at all. It's a mess. Can you fix it? Not permanently, but I can make some calls. Remind people that there are things in the system that predate current oversight, and that poking at them doesn't serve anyone's interests. It'll buy you some breathing room. How much? 6 months, maybe a year. Eventually, someone new will rotate into one of these positions, and they'll start asking the same questions all over again because nobody briefed them properly. That's how institutions work. Institutional memory only lasts as long as the people carrying it. Avery sat back down on the couch, suddenly tired in a way that had nothing to do with her shoulder. Maybe I should just let them deactivate it, make it easier for everyone. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. I wanted to see a doctor about my shoulder. That's all I wanted. And instead I've spent the whole day dealing with security protocols and bureaucrats who think they're protecting something when mostly they're just protecting their own asses. Welcome to government service. It hasn't improved since you left. Clearly. Avery rubbed her eyes. Make your calls. Do what you can. I'll try to stay off the radar. Avery, wait. Before you hang up, there's something else you should know. The tone in McBride's voice made her sit up straighter. What? After you left this morning, I pulled your full file. The classified one. The one that's supposed to require executive authorization, but that I can access because I'm the installation commander and I have emergency SIN override privileges. And there's a note in there from 2009, right after Alpha 6 disappeared. It says that if any of the remaining Alpha clearances are activated, certain parties should be notified immediately. It doesn't say who those parties are, just that they exist and they're monitoring. Monitoring for what? The file doesn't say. But Avery, if someone's been watching for Alpha flags, they know what happened this morning. They know you're active, and they might reach out. Might. There's no protocol for it, no instructions. Just a note saying they should be notified. For all I know, that note's been obsolete for years and nobody bothered to remove it. Or it's still active and someone's already making calls. Avery processed this, tried to figure out if it changed anything. Did you notify anyone? I sent the standard reports through normal channels. If there are other channels I don't know about, they'll trigger automatically based on the system flag. I can't control that. So somewhere someone who's been waiting for 16 years just got an alert that one of the Alphas surfaced. Possibly. Probably. I don't know. Jesus, Tessa. I'm sorry. I thought you should know. In case someone shows up asking questions that don't make sense. Everything about this stopped making sense around the time those guards started laughing at my ID. Fair point. McBride hesitated. Are you going to be okay? I've survived worse than bureaucratic interest. I'll be fine. Call me if anything weird happens. Anything at all. I mean it. I will. And Tessa, thanks. For all of this. For handling it. For giving a damn. You don't have to thank me. We take care of our own. Even the ones who technically don't exist. They hung up, and Avery sat in her quiet living room as the afternoon bled into evening, thinking about notes in classified files, and people who might be monitoring, and the way some missions never really end, they just go dormant until something wakes them up again. She made dinner pasta with vegetables simple and quick, and ate it while listening to the radio, some public station playing jazz that was complicated enough to require attention, but mellow enough not to intrude. She washed the dishes. She took her evening medications. She did all the normal things that constituted her normal life, and tried not to think about the fact that normal had just become significantly more complicated. Around 8 o'clock, she went out onto the porch and sat in the rocking chair she'd bought at an estate sale 3 years ago, watching the darkness settle over her property like a blanket. The temperature had dropped with the sun, that sharp autumn cold that promised frost by morning. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders and listened to the sounds of the woods, the rustle of something small moving through the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl, the creek running its endless course toward whatever came next. She thought about Deputy Director Holland and his questions, about Colonel McBride and her warnings, about 2 young guards who'd learned that disrespect has consequences, about a system that remembered her even when most people had forgotten. She thought about Alpha 6, whoever they'd been wherever they were now. Gone for 16 years. Either dead or so deep underground that death would have been simpler. She'd never known them well. The Alphas hadn't operated as a team, more like parallel agents who occasionally intersected in briefing rooms where everything was need to know and nobody needed to know much. But she remembered a face, a voice, the way they'd moved with the same careful precision she'd learned. Remembered thinking that this was someone who understood the cost of what they were doing and did it anyway. She wondered if her scanning that ID card had triggered some alert in whatever hole Alpha 6 had disappeared into. Wondered if they'd see the notification and feel relief that they weren't the last one standing, or fear that their hiding place had just become more visible. She wondered if she'd made a mistake by not just getting a new ID card years ago, by not letting the old one expire naturally, letting that chapter close completely. But she'd kept it because it was real, because everything else about that time in her life had been lies and legends and carefully constructed fictions, and that card with its faded photo and its perpetual clearance was the only tangible proof that it had all actually happened. And maybe she admitted to herself as she rocked slowly in the chair and watched the stars emerge between the tree branches, maybe she'd kept it because she wasn't ready to be forgotten. Because being a ghost was lonely, and sometimes even ghosts needed to be acknowledged. A car drove past on the main road, headlights sweeping through the trees, then disappeared around a curve. The sound of the engine faded into silence. Everything returned to quiet. Avery stayed on the porch for another hour, wrapped in her blanket, breathing cold air that tasted like autumn and memory. Then she went inside, locked the doors, checked the windows out of habit, even though she'd lived here for 8 years without incident, and went to bed. She dreamed of a briefing room that didn't exist anymore, in a building that had been demolished in 2003, where 6 people sat around a table and listened to a man whose name she'd never learned tell them that what they were about to do would never be acknowledged and could never be discussed and would haunt them for the rest of their lives. She dreamed of saying yes anyway because someone had to, and she'd always been someone who did what needed doing, even when it cost her everything. She woke up at 3 in the morning with her shoulder aching and her mouth dry, lay in the darkness for a while, listening to the house settle around her, then got up and took more ibuprofen, and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the overwhelming certainty that something had shifted, that the careful equilibrium she'd maintained for 3 decades had been disturbed, and that whatever came next would be different from what came before. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time that felt both too fast and too slow. Outside, the darkness was absolute, the kind that only exists far from cities where light pollution doesn't reach. and the sky opens up into infinite black, punctuated by stars. Avery finished her water-washed the glass and went back to bed. She lay there until dawn, not sleeping, but not quite awake, either existing in that liminal space between rest and vigilance that she'd learned to inhabit in places where closing your eyes completely could get you killed. When the first light finally came pale and gray through her bedroom window, she got up and started her day the way she always did: coffee first, then shower, then deciding what needed to be done and doing it. Normal routine, normal life. As if the previous day had been nothing more than an anomaly, a brief interruption in the steady rhythm of existence. But the phone on her kitchen counter held messages from numbers she didn't recognize, and the laptop she rarely used had emails waiting that she knew she shouldn't open without thinking very carefully about what opening them might mean. And somewhere in offices she couldn't see, and rooms she'd never visit, people were talking about her making decisions about her, treating her like a problem to be solved, or a resource to be managed, or a ghost that needed to be either exorcised or exploited. She poured her coffee, added cream, and stood at the window, watching the sun burn through the morning mist, turning the woods into something that looked almost magical in the early light. Beautiful and wild, and hers at least for now at least, until whatever came next arrived and changed everything again. She'd been here before. In different circumstances, with different stakes, but the fundamental equation was the same. She'd survived by being smarter, more patient, more willing to endure than the people who wanted to use her, or stop her, or make her into something she wasn't. She could do it again. She would do it again, because giving up wasn't in her nature, and because she'd learned a long time ago that sometimes survival was its own form of victory, and because those two young guards had reminded her that she still had something to prove, not to them, but to herself. That she was still here, still standing, still carrying what needed to be carried. And that was enough. For now, that was enough. The coffee was still hot when Avery heard the sound of tires on gravel. She wasn't expecting anyone. The physical therapy office wouldn't call until next week, and the only person who regularly visited was the postal carrier, who came around noon. But it was barely 8 in the morning, and the sound of an engine approaching her house sent a familiar spike of alertness through her system. Not quite alarm, not quite preparation, but something in between that came from years of learning to read situations before they fully developed. She set down her mug and moved to the front window, staying back just enough to see without being obviously visible. A black SUV, unmarked government plates. It rolled to a stop beside her pickup truck, and 2 people got out. The driver was a woman in her 30s, dark suit, sensible shoes, moving with the economical precision of someone who'd done executive protection work. The passenger was older, maybe 60, also in a suit, but with the slightly rumpled quality of someone who prioritized function over form. He carried a leather folder under one arm. Avery watched them approach her porch, saw the way the woman's eyes tracked the property, the woodpile, the windows, the tree line, evaluating threats and exits with professional efficiency. When they reached the door, the man knocked. 3 times firm, but not aggressive. She waited a beat, then another, letting them understand that she wasn't in a hurry. Then she opened the door, standing in the frame with one hand on the knob and the other loose at her side. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, the kind of smile that was meant to be reassuring, but couldn't quite hide the calculation behind it. "Ms. Avery Cross. My name is Robert Kendrick. This is Agent Sharon Voss. We're with a federal task force that coordinates interagency response to legacy program activations. We were hoping we could have a few minutes of your time." "Federal task force," Avery repeated. "Which agency?" That's complicated. The task force draws from multiple departments: Justice, Defense, State. We're chartered under executive authority to handle situations that fall outside normal bureaucratic channels. And you're here because I scanned my ID card yesterday. That's part of it, yes. Kendrick gestured to the porch. May we come in? This conversation would be better conducted inside. Avery studied them both for a long moment. Voss hadn't spoken yet, but her posture had relaxed slightly enough to suggest she wasn't expecting trouble. Kendrick held her gaze without discomfort, waiting patiently. They could have come in harder with warrants or demands, or the kind of pressure that forced compliance. Instead, they were being polite, which meant they wanted something they couldn't simply take. You can come in, she said, finally stepping back. But keep your hands where I can see them and understand that I'm recording this conversation. We'd expect nothing less, Kendrick said. She led them into her living room, gestured to the couch. They sat. She took the chair across from them, positioned so she could see both the door and the window. Old habits never really forgotten. Voss's eyes tracked these movements, and something in her expression suggested approval. Kendrick set his leather folder on the coffee table, but didn't open it yet. First, let me say that we're not here to interrogate you or to suggest you've done anything wrong. The flag that your credentials triggered yesterday was significant, and it initiated protocols that require us to verify certain information and to brief you on current threat assessments that may be relevant to your situation. Threat assessments, Avery said. What kind of threats? Before we get to that, I need to confirm some basic facts. You were part of Operation Echo Zero, correct? I can neither confirm nor deny involvement in classified operations. Ms. Cross, I have clearance to discuss Echo Zero. More than that, I'm one of 17 people currently alive who knows it existed. We're not trying to compromise your operational security. We're trying to protect it. Avery leaned back in her chair, folded her arms. Show me your credentials. Kendrick pulled out a wallet, flipped it open. The ID inside was genuine. She'd seen enough fake ones to know the difference, and listed him as a senior liaison officer with something called the Special Access Coordination Office. Voss produced similar credentials. Both had clearance levels that would have made Deputy Director Holland's head spin. Fine, Avery said. Yes, I was part of Echo Zero. What about it? How much do you know about what happened after the operation was concluded? I know we were dispersed to different assignments. I know 4 of the original 6 are dead. I know Alpha 6 disappeared in 2009. Beyond that, I know what I read in newspapers and what I can infer from the world not having ended yet. Kendrick opened his folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the table to her. It was heavily redacted, but she could make out enough to understand what she was looking at. A threat assessment report dated 2 weeks ago, with references to legacy assets and compromised historical operations, and ongoing counterintelligence concerns. 3 months ago, Kendrick said, an analyst at DIA flagged unusual activity in databases related to Cold War-era special access programs. Someone was running searches, very sophisticated searches designed to look like routine maintenance queries, but actually probing for information about specific operations and specific personnel. They were looking for us, Avery said. The Alphas. Not just you. They were looking for anyone connected to operations that were classified above TSSCI during the 1990s. But yes, Echo Zero was on the list. We traced the queries back to a shell account that bounced through servers in 7 countries before going dark. Whoever's behind it knows what they're doing. Voss spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a slight Boston accent. We don't know if this is foreign intelligence domestic extremists or someone with a personal grudge against legacy programs. What we do know is that they're methodical, patient, and extremely well-resourced, and your flag yesterday may have given them exactly what they were looking for. Avery felt something cold settle in her chest. You're saying I compromised myself by scanning my card. Not compromised, Kendrick said quickly, but visible. If they're monitoring the same systems we are, and we have to assume they are, then they know one of the alphas is active. They don't necessarily know which one or where you are, but they know someone triggered a flag in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So what do you want from me? We want you to understand the situation, to be aware that someone might try to make contact. They might pose as researchers, journalists, veterans looking to connect with someone from your era. They might approach you online or in person. They might not approach you at all. They might just watch. And if they do, you contact us immediately. Don't engage. Don't try to determine if they're legitimate. Just contact us. Voss pulled out a business card, set it on the table. It had a phone number and nothing else. That line is monitored 24/7. You call, you tell them your name, and someone will respond within 15 minutes. Anywhere in the country. Avery picked up the card, studied it. Plain white cardstock, printed number, no identifying marks. The kind of thing that could be destroyed easily if necessary. You're treating this like I'm in danger. We're treating this like you might be, Kendrick corrected. The reality is, we don't know what these people want. If they're foreign intelligence trying to reconstruct historical operations, they probably just want information. If there's something else, ideologues, revenge seekers, people who think they have scores to settle, then the danger is real. And Alpha 6. Have they been contacted? Kendrick and Voss exchanged a glance. We don't know where Alpha 6 is, Kendrick said carefully. They disappeared completely 16 years ago. No electronic footprint, no financial activity, no communication with former associates. If they're still alive, they've gone to extraordinary lengths to stay hidden. Maybe they had good reason. Maybe. Or maybe they knew something we didn't. Either way, you're the only confirmed active alpha. That makes you both valuable and vulnerable. Avery set the card down on the arm of her chair. I appreciate the warning, but I've been living quietly for 3 decades. I don't advertise my past. I don't attend reunions or give interviews or maintain contact with anyone from that world except Colonel McBride, and that's only because she's impossible to avoid. We understand, but quiet doesn't mean invisible Ms. Cross. Not anymore. The world's changed. Information that used to take months to compile can now be assembled in hours. People who want to find you have tools we couldn't have imagined in the 90s. Then what do you suggest I do? Go into hiding, change my name, pretend I don't exist. No, Voss said. You keep living your life. You stay alert. You vary your routines slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to avoid being completely predictable. You trust your instincts. You spent years operating in hostile environments. Those skills don't disappear just because you're not actively using them. And if someone does make contact, if they claim to be legitimate, then you verify through us before you engage. Period. No exceptions. Kendrick leaned forward slightly. Ms. Cross, I know this isn't what you want to hear. I know you came home expecting to leave this behind, but the reality is that some things don't stay behind. They follow us, sometimes for our entire lives. Avery looked at him, at this man who'd clearly seen his share of classified horrors, and was now tasked with managing the aftermath of operations he probably hadn't even known about when they were happening. Are you trying to recruit me? No, we're trying to protect you. There's a difference. Is there? Because it sounds a lot like you're trying to pull me back into something I walked away from. We're asking you to be careful. That's all. To recognize that your visibility has increased, and that increased visibility comes with risk. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. They sat in silence for a moment. The morning light streaming through the windows and painting everything in shades of gold that made the conversation feel surreal. These people in their dark suits with their leather folders and their warnings about threats that might or might not materialize seemed wildly out of place in her small house, with its worn furniture and collection of books about hiking trails. Finally, Avery stood. "Thank you for the warning. I'll be careful. I'll keep that card handy. But I'm not changing my life based on hypothetical threats. I've earned the right to live however I want, and I'm not giving that up because someone's running database queries." Kendrick and Voss stood as well. "We understand," Kendrick said, "and we respect that. Just remember that we're here if you need us. If anything feels wrong, if anyone approaches you with questions that seem too specific, if you notice surveillance, anything at all, you call." "I will." Voss moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Ms. Cross, what you did during Echo Zero mattered. It saved lives, created stability in places that desperately needed it. The fact that nobody knows about it doesn't make it less important." "I didn't do it for recognition," Avery said. "I did it because someone asked, and I said yes, and that was that." Still, it mattered. They left, and Avery stood on her porch watching the black SUV back down her driveway and disappear into the trees. When the sound of the engine faded completely, she went back inside, locked the door, and stood in her living room trying to process what had just happened. The card Voss had given her sat on the chair arm, white against the fabric. A lifeline or a trap, depending on how you looked at it. She picked it up, studied the number, then walked to the kitchen and stuck it to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse that she'd bought on vacation years ago. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tessa McBride. "Two feds just left my office asking about you. Said they were from some interagency task force. Told them what they probably already knew, and sent them away. You okay?" Avery typed back. "They just left here. Gave me a warning about potential threats. Told me to be careful." "Are you going to be careful?" "I'm always careful. Doesn't mean I'm going to hide." "Good. You've hidden long enough. Time to remind people who you are." Avery smiled at that, at the idea that yesterday's chaos had been some kind of declaration. Maybe it had been. Maybe she'd been hiding not just from threats, but from herself, from the parts of her identity that she'd buried along with her operational history. Maybe scanning that card hadn't been an accident or a moment of defiance, but something deeper, a refusal to be forgotten, to let her story disappear into classified files that nobody would ever read. She made fresh coffee, took it out onto the porch, and sat in her rocking chair as the morning warmed and the world continued its routine business of existing. Birds called from the trees. The creek murmured its endless conversation with the stones. A plane passed overhead too high to see clearly, just a distant rumble heading somewhere important. And Avery Cross, Alpha 5, sat in her quiet sanctuary and thought about visibility and legacy and the way some stories demand to be told, even when telling them is impossible. She thought about two young guards who'd learned that respect isn't optional, that every person carries history. They can't see that assumptions are the beginning of humiliation. She thought about Colonel McBride and her files about Deputy Director Holland and his questions about Kendrick and Voss and their warnings about threats that might be real or might be paranoia disguised as caution. She thought about Alpha 6, wherever they were, and hoped they'd found peace, or at least something approximating it. And she thought about herself, about the choices she'd made, and the prices she'd paid, and the question that had haunted her since the day she'd walked away from it all. Had it been worth it? The answer, she realized, wasn't simple. It couldn't be simple. Because worth was measured in outcomes she'd never see in lives saved that would never know they'd been in danger. Instability so subtle that people mistook it for luck or chance, or the natural order of things. She'd given years of her life to work that would never be acknowledged. She'd lied to people she loved, carried secrets that isolated her, made sacrifices that still ached decades later. She'd done things she wasn't proud of in service of goals she believed in, and she'd lived with the consequences every day since. But she'd done what needed doing. In that moment, with the information she'd had and the options available to her, she'd made the choice she thought was right. And if she had to do it again, knowing everything she knew now, she suspected she'd make the same choice. Because some people were built to carry weight others couldn't. Some people saw the darkness and walked into it anyway because someone had to, and they were willing to be that someone. She'd been that person then. She was still that person now, even if the battles had changed. The morning stretched into afternoon, and Avery sat on her porch, watching her small piece of the world turn through its cycles. She didn't go back inside until the sun was high, and her coffee had gone cold, and her shoulder reminded her that she had physical therapy to schedule, and medications to take, and all the mundane maintenance that came with being human and aging and alive. She went inside, called the physical therapy office, made an appointment for the following week. She took her pills. She ate lunch. She read her book about the Appalachian Trail and thought about maybe hiking a section of it next spring if her shoulder improved. Normal life. Ordinary existence. The kind of day that billions of people lived without drama or danger or federal agents showing up with warnings about database queries. Except she wasn't billions of people. She was Avery Cross. She was Alpha 5. She was a woman who'd walked through fire and come out the other side carrying scars nobody could see and stories nobody would believe. And yesterday she'd reminded everyone, the guards who'd laughed, the bureaucrats who'd panicked, the systems that had remembered that she was still here. Still standing. Still refusing to be dismissed or forgotten or treated as irrelevant. The lesson she'd taught wasn't just for those two young men at the security checkpoint. It was for everyone who'd ever assumed that age meant weakness, that civilian clothes meant civilian mind, that absence from the spotlight meant absence of significance. She'd taught them that respect isn't about rank or uniform or position. It's about recognizing that every person carries battles you can't see, sacrifices you'll never understand, strength you can't measure until you test it. She'd taught them that some clearances don't expire because some service doesn't end, and that the people you dismiss today might be the ones who protected everything you take for granted yesterday. She'd taught them that quiet dignity is its own form of power, and that patience is a weapon as effective as any other when wielded by someone who knows how to wait. And most importantly, she'd reminded herself that she was still that person. Still capable. Still relevant. Still worthy of the respect she'd earned in rooms where nobody was keeping score. The sun moved across the sky, painting new shadows on her porch. The woods settled into afternoon stillness. The creek kept running as it always had, as it always would, carrying water from somewhere to somewhere else without knowing or caring about the larger journey. And Avery Cross rocked slowly in her chair, her shoulder aching slightly but bearably, her mind clear, her heart steady, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride exactly, and not satisfaction, but something close to both. A sense that she'd stood her ground when it would have been easier to back down, that she'd claimed space in a world that would have preferred she remain invisible. She'd made waves. She'd caused problems. She'd reminded people that some things some people deserve to be taken seriously regardless of how they look or how old they are or how long they've been gone. That was worth something. Maybe not everything, but something. And for now, sitting on her porch in the autumn sunshine with her quiet life spread around her like a hard-won treasure that was enough. Because respect isn't given. It's commanded. Not through volume or aggression or force, but through the steady, unshakable presence of someone who knows exactly who they are and refuses to pretend otherwise. She'd been that person once in service to her country. She was that person still in service to herself. And anyone who looked at her and saw only an old woman with a faded ID card would learn, as those two guards had learned, that the most dangerous mistake is assuming you understand someone you've never really seen.